Hello. My name is Chad Weidner, and I am assistant professor in English and film at University College Roosevelt. That is a faculty of Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And I just want to take a moment to thank the organizers of this symposium and the wider World Wood Day celebrations here in China. It's been fantastic so far. And I'm really pleased and humbled to be here today. So my research interests include eco-criticism, which is a humanities subfield that examines cultural texts such as literature and film in the context of environmental concerns. So I'm very interested in exploring the places where there's friction between human culture and the environment, or where they overlap, or where they meet. Yeah? And as a researcher in the environmental humanities, I'm really fascinated by what I see here at this symposium. I did not know that so many people from so many different disciplines and fields were working together to try to create a more sustainable future for wood. So for me, it's very, very interesting to be here. And we live in a time of great transformation. And I think it's also a very special moment, one that is filled with many opportunities. And I think this is a place where I think China can really help lead the way towards a better future for, not just for China, but for all of humanity. Yeah? And so some participants at this symposium are interested in scientific approaches to promoting sustainable wood, and such topics certainly require serious attention. Other speakers are concerned with economic aspects of the wood industry and reasons to consider both environmental and commercial factors when planning workable strategies for the future. But I've been asked to come here today to talk about other aspects of wood from a humanities perspective. So today I'm going to discuss the ways in which art, and more specifically literature and other cultural texts, have been influenced by the very idea of wood. So while experts in plant science, economics, and law all have much to contribute to creating a more sustainable future for wood, what can the humanities add to the discussion? So this talk will briefly cover some historical examples from American cultural texts that reveal a changing view of the forest over time as a location of hostility, a site of growth, and finally as a place of human renewal. So to begin, I just want to talk a little bit about the forest as a location of hostility. And I think this slide, this slide you can see, I think, effectively captures what some of the first Dutch and English settlers probably thought of their new situation when arriving on the east coast of the North American continent. It must have seemed a very dark place indeed, full of shadowy woodlands, unknown dangers, wild people, and perhaps even evil spirits. And this image depicts the supposed murder of Jane McCrae in 1777. And this painting by John van der Leen captures what I think many white colonists probably thought about the people who inhabited the forest, that they were godless, uncivilized, and extremely violent. More interesting is the peculiar and sometimes contradictory historical connections between America and the forest. In what is now the United States, the view of nature has changed considerably over time. Native Americans characteristically saw trees as sacred and imbued with sacred pantheistic value. And such a pantheistic attitude was prominent in most of Europe until Christianity became the dominant religion. And when Europeans first arrived on the east coast of the North American continent, they were really astonished by the scale of the wilderness that they saw. Early explorers were particularly struck by the lack of civilization as they understood it, which to them meant cities. Early Dutch and English settlers found the east coast incredibly hostile. They viewed the land as brutal and godless, as a savage garden. And William Bradford's early journals provide a window into this view. He traveled to North America in the early 17th century, but was greatly discouraged by what he saw as an incredibly strange and intimidating place. At first, he despaired at what he perceived as the complete and utter darkness of the North American continent. And I think one can really sense the desperation with which he must have viewed his condition, having left every bit of civilization and impossible distance behind him. For example, in a journal he wrote in 1620, so 400 years ago, he described the travelers' impressions of their new dark realm. What could they see but a hideous and desolate wilderness full of wild beasts and wild men? All things stand upon them with a weather-beaten face, and the whole country, full of woods and thickets, represented a wild and savage hue. They looked behind them. There was the mighty ocean which they had passed, and now was a main gulf to separate them from all the civil parts of the world. And while Bradford's view was a disheartening analysis of his condition in a strange and foreign place, other Europeans saw the new continent as a source of enigmatic fascination. And to them, the New World represented a chance to reclaim paradise, or perhaps even an opportunity to reinvent humanity. And this is a painting called American Progress by John Goss from 1872 that shows the European American moving into the dark interior of the North American continent, bringing light, ideology, and a fascination with the idea of technological progress. And this is something that Leo Marx discusses a great deal in his 1962 book, A Machine in the Garden. Really fascinating book. But what's really important is that the irresistible urge to create a world anew contributed to the later development of the nation, and in a larger sense, aspects, I think, of the modern American character. The shift from a rural nation to a modern state occurred really quite rapidly. The desire to reshape the land for human use was inherited from European colonists, and perhaps the vastness of the land and the urge to remake it encouraged early Americans to develop a kind of a love affair with tools, and therefore with technology. Frederick Jackson Turner argues, for Americans, culture means to a large extent technology. And American culture has long had a strange and sometimes contradictory relationship between technology and the natural world. The movement west and the subjugation of the frontier required constantly improving tools. For example, if one could build a better axe, which was specifically designed and shaped for a particular kind of hardwood that encroached on one's land, then one could more easily clear the trees from the edge of one's property, thus opening the space for agricultural pursuits or economic opportunity. The improvement of tools allowed America to transform itself quite remarkably fast. And it only took about 2 centuries to transform what was a virgin land into a tamed continent. And Annette Kolotny claims, colonization brought with it an inevitable paradox. The success of settlement depended on the ability to master the land, transforming virgin territories into something else. A farm, a village, a road, a canal, a railway, a mine, a factory, a city, and finally, an urban nation. So this change is visible not only in terms of the shape of America. And in the United States, people have historically viewed nature as something to be dominated and exploited for human use. And this anthropocentric view, I think, was never intentionally harmful. And you have to also think about the 18th and 19th century imagination. And it wasn't until the second half of the 19th century that people had understood that resources were limited. Right. The young nation saw endless natural resources that had to be used in the creation of a new nation. Forests needed to be cleared to open up the space for new settlement and agriculture. And the damage to the land and the people that inhabited it took some time to become visible. And according to Frederick Turner's 1893, The Frontier in American History, the frontier holds a pretty special place in the cultural history of the nation. And the movement west ultimately resulted in a strange sort of opposition that did not become obvious until the frontier was already closed. So Americans long for the future, but simultaneously revere and long for the past. Okay, so the final element of my talk is the longest part, and it will involve a discussion of the place, the forest as a place of human renewal. And I want to go back to William Bradford for a moment. Present conditions force us to re-examine the role of development and the loss of nature. Scott Sanders tells us, in an age of strip mines, nuclear plants, urban sprawl, interstate highways, factory farms, chemical dumps, mass extinction of plant and animal species, oil spills, and development, many of us have come to view our situation completely opposite to that of William Bradford. So Americans are no longer terrified by the size of the forest or the dimensions of the continents. In fact, they often long for the unobtainable past and have become concerned with the consequences of technological advancements and the perceived human defeat of the natural world. The American continent was once viewed as undeveloped. However, the remarkably rapid transformation from an agrarian culture has led to a condition that some maybe even believe may be a bit overdeveloped. And Frederick Turner says, if nature in our myth is eternal, unchanging, pure, gentle, wise, innocent, balanced, harmonious, and good, then culture, technology, must be temporary, progressive, polluting, violent, blind, sophisticated, distorted, destructive, and evil. So I think this forces us to consider the crucial question of whether modern civilization dictates human alienation from the natural world. Ralph Waldo Emerson's Nature proposes that humans have focused too much on theoretical approaches to understanding the earth. He insists that we should instead endeavor to better appreciate the human relationship with the natural world. And he deliberates the activity of stargazing as just one example. And he believes that one can perceive the natural around us not with the physical senses, but also with the mind's eye. And this search for nature and spiritual rediscovery, he believes, will reveal the larger chain to which we all belong. And I would argue that that chain of being is essentially ecological. Emerson's lecture, entitled The American Scholar, was delivered in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1837, and in his talk, Emerson called for America to develop its own intellectual and philosophical path that recognized nature as the single most important factor in the development of the human imagination. And I'm going to quote him here. The first in time and the first in importance of the influences upon the mind is that of nature. Every day the sun, and after sunset, night and her stars. Ever the winds blow, ever the grass grows. Every day men and women conversing, beholding and beholden. The scholar is he of all men whom the spectacle most engages. He must settle its value in his own mind. What is nature to him? There is never a beginning, there is never an end. And his lecture encouraged American thinkers of his generation to reconsider their approaches not only to philosophy, but also to living their lives. Emerson's talk also underlined the importance of forging a new American intellectual path distinct from Europe, which I think was actually a mild form of nationalism. Another crucial member of the Transcendentalist movement, Henry David Thoreau, encouraged people to take initiative to change society for the benefit of all humanity. And his 1854 Waldo details his personal experiment to live a wholesome, frugal, minimalist lifestyle for 2 years in a cabin at Walden Pond. And in the first chapter, he explains his plans for his bold experiment. He wanted to illustrate the spiritual advantages of living a modest existence close to nature, and he documented his expenses and celebrated the fact that he could live quite simply for extremely little money. And in the section, Where I Lived and What I Lived For, he notes how after he had considered buying a farm, he finally chose the cabin's location. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn from what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life, living is so dear, nor did I wish to practice resignation unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. And if it proved to be mean, why then to get the whole and genuine meanness of it, and publish its meanness to the world, or if it were sublime, to know it by experience. And Walden functions, I think, in crucial ways that are really important to how we think about issues of sustainability. First, he celebrates the forest, and at the same time demonstrates a sincere human intellectual interest in the environment. Secondly, there is a recognition of a need to balance the trappings of modernity with the autonomy provided by living close to the natural world. And there are some more recent examples that can also help uncover the ways in which humans see the forest not as a place of darkness or as a source of evil spirits, but instead as a place of redemption. And one noteworthy example from the 1970s still, I think, grips the American consciousness. And during the 1970s, Americans unconsciously tried to retrieve the virtue of nature through the commodification of what was widely perceived as Native American perspectives. And a handy example of such commodification involves the Keep America Beautiful public service announcements that began on Earth Day in 1971. The broadcasts were meant to promote awareness of littering and pollution amongst members of the public. And an Italian American played the role of Iron Eyes Cody, a seemingly old-fashioned Native American living in the modern world. And one public service announcement, the Indian rode his horse amongst trees and along a stream that had been spoiled by human litter. And a presenter reminds the viewer, people start pollution, people can stop it. The camera then focuses on Iron Eyes Cody's face as a tear rolls down his cheek. And I want to show that.
The first American people loved the land. They held it in simple reverence. And in some Americans today, that spirit is reborn. This is South Coast Botanic Garden in California. Once this was a dumping ground for trash and litter. Community volunteers cleaned, planted, and reclaimed it, and there the land is good again. But all around us are reminders of how far we still have to go. So everyone must get involved. Now, to contact the Keep America Beautiful team nearest you, write Keep America Beautiful, 99 Park Avenue, New York, New York.
Okay, and I think that's a really fascinating example because that's not really the forest, and that's not really an Indian. Yeah? So here what we see is a symbolic tear shed by a symbolic Indian. And I think this fragment produces a kind of retroactive nostalgia that is a very powerful environmental message, but it also reverses an early view of Native Americans and the forest. So we have reversed one historical view of the American Indian from a godless savage to a defender of nature. And we've also inverted an early view of the forest from a location of hostility to a place of human renewal. Okay, so in conclusion, I just want to say the following. As we proceed deep into the 21st century, humanity faces a number of serious problems. And more important than ever is that we need to work together in new ways across cultures and across academic disciplines. And I think that this very event is a striking example of the ways in which government planners, industry leaders, botanists, and even humanities researchers can come together to talk about larger issues such as sustainability of wood. And more events like this need to take place if we are to seriously handle the many challenges that we face. Thanks.